Hi everyone, my name is Eran Kinsbruner and I want to welcome you all to this webinar by Perfecto. So I just want to start with the very basic housekeeping information for those of you who are joining. So this webinar is obviously recorded and the recording will be made available to all of you after the webinar. The slides and the material are also in the resources of this webinar. So you can find it there embedded in the webinar panel. Feel free to ask questions during this webinar. Obviously, I'm Eran Kinsbruner. I'm the Chief Evangelist and author at Perfecto, also part of the product management. With me, I have the VP of Product Management, Tzvika Shahaf. I have from Deque, Dylan Barrel, and Henrik Rexed from Neotys. Guys, if you can introduce yourself one by one, starting with you, Henrik.
Hi, so my name is Henrik Rexed. I am a performance engineer specializing in the partners. I'm building solutions for the community on the performance side, and I'm very glad to be part of this webinar with all of you.
Thank you, Henrik. Dylan, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Dylan Barrel. I'm in charge of products at Deque, and we focus on making organizations independent with accessibility technology. Very excited to be included as part of this panel.
And Tzvika, can you also introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Tzvika. I'm leading the product at Perfecto, working with customers globally to unlock the true potential of continuous functional test automation with the suite of offering that we have from our side. Excited to be here today, and thank you guys from Deque and Neotys for the partnership and for the opportunity to run this great webinar, great content together.
Awesome, guys. So we have a packed agenda. We have prepared tons of information covering performance testing, accessibility testing, trying to shift left these types of testing into the pipeline with a very exciting end-to-end demo that my colleagues here helped prepared. We're going to set the stage starting this webinar by covering the Agile Testing Manifesto to just try to connect the dots, why it's so important to include these types of testing together with other test types such as functional testing. We're going to define for you the shift left testing terminology, the performance and accessibility testing, what they actually mean by the experts online with me. We're going to also cover the fundamentals of performance and accessibility testing, again, by the experts online, and finalize the webinar with some best practices and a live demo of shifting left performance testing and accessibility at scale using Neotys, Deque, and Perfecto. Again, feel free to ask questions during the webinar. At the end, we'll follow up with you, again, as time permits during this webinar and also afterwards. Without further ado, Tzvika, let's start with where we are today from a digital standpoint.
So great opportunity to do that. Thank you, Eran. Guys, as you all know, and I'm sure that this is not the webinar that is touching some of the impact that we see from recent COVID pandemic, digital transformation became a reality for many organizations overnight. And with that, we see, two ways that you actually kind of position following this change. You're either a winner or a loser in terms of digital transformation. Either your services are being consumed better or easier using the digital sphere, or that some of the services are blocked and your offering is not 100% digital or available to customers. That becomes a blocker. For performance, for accessibility, for many other ways that becomes reality now in terms of the value that the service provides. This is more important than ever. There are so many examples of retail sites and other services that just crashed due to performance aspects that weren't taken under consideration. Services that weren't optimized for different people with disabilities that needs to make that leapfrog. So I think that, the COVID impact just uplift the importance of adding the non-functional shift left testing into the scope into the suite, as we refer it today, and also Forrester is referring that as a suite of continuous functional test automation capabilities that are required today. With that in mind, if we look at the Agile Manifesto, and if we can move to the next slide, Eran, you can see, guys, that this is really embedded, or this is something that is naturally part of that Agile testing manifesto. And the focus here would be just to go through all the highlights, if you like, terms to really find the golden path here for continuous testing that doesn't happen at the end of the session, but happens throughout the cycle, within the cycle, early as possible. That includes all testing activities, including the shift left non-functional test, and not just the standard and obvious UI and functional element that really provides value. You need to keep asking yourself, is this test case brings me value? Is the result in case of a failure is really important to me, or that's something that I can ignore? So we need to keep in the cycle, running from RCI, only the valuable test cases, and bring everyone to join and be part of that party, whether you're a business tester, whether you are a technical tester or a developer from different teams. These tests should not happen in a siloed mode, and visibility should be, across the board for all team members. And of course, the product coverage is key to make sure that the relevant and valuable test cases are being tested across the right platforms. So the combo of the coverage becomes really key, and we'll talk about it later on. If we look in the next slide about really the current state of many organizations that were impacted by digital transformation and the fact that they weren't ready into the ideal or the desired state, it's pretty simple. The fact that issues are identified later in the process, as you can see in the right image, create bottlenecks, create a negative impact on the innovation throughput, as organizations are dealing with kind of a repetitive mode of defects that are escaping to production. When you need now to change the context of developer that was working on a specific functionality weeks ago, and now we need to go back and fix that, the context change has an impact on productivity, and the overall innovation throughput is getting impacted. If you look about the desired state, what organizations really want to achieve with testing that happens throughout the SDLC is really to increase the innovation throughput, especially in these days when you want to emphasize the value, the offering of your digital product, your service. So innovation becomes key, and the quality of that output is important more than ever. If you think about just, examples of banking services that we all used to consume in branches in the past, and the fact that millennials today look at banks as something that is considered as more of a digital user experience rather than valuable just banking services, that becomes key for their, selection of what would be the banking service that they will adopt. And the organizations are looking to reduce the time that it takes them to release. By the end of the day, they want to ship stable code faster, and that has also an impact on cost. Lastly, in the next slide, the idea around the balance between automation coverage that should happen first to include all the relevant components of testing, the shift left non-functional activities of performance, of accessibility, as my colleagues will share here today with you guys, alongside the UI, the functional, and other aspects like API tests and other, and make sure that we have the right coverage, the right platforms at each and every stage, from virtual devices early in the process to real devices later on, to have all the latest and greatest versions of operating system, of unique devices that we want to make sure that the test is running properly. So performance tests should happen and should be tested like your users are using the service. And the art of building the right coverage metrics, the right coverage cube that will provide that is key. It should be, a major consideration in our testing strategy. and something that we at Perfecto always keep bringing to the front with index report that provides you with the prescriptive way and recommendation on when to test, on which type of platforms and operating systems, no matter where you are in the globe, just to make sure that your coverage is aligned and the user experience is really safeguarded and optimized for the sake of the relevant usage footprint that we see.
Great, Tzvika. Thank you. And I think this is a great introduction of where we are from a digital standpoint, why it's so important to shift and include all types of testing in a single pipeline to identify issues fast, to move faster in today's digital reality. With that, I would like to move to the definition sections of both accessibility and performance, starting with the accessibility. And Dylan, if you can take the next few slides and cover what is accessibility testing from Deque standpoint?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron. So accessibility is really about making your applications usable by people with all sorts of abilities, regardless of whether they have a disability or not. And really, so accessibility testing is about testing how well you've done that. At the end of the day, that's really what it's about. And so there's an aspect of accessibility testing that's about usability. And then there's an aspect of accessibility testing that's very much about can the accessibility information be discerned and can the user interface be operated. And really, it's that second form of accessibility testing that most organizations are engaged with when they're engaged within the development testing process. The usability testing is done upfront often or at the end once something's in production to figure out what to improve over the next version. So when we talk about accessibility testing and improving that and making that efficient and making that sustainable, we're really talking about that testing embedded within the development process. And just to some of the statistics about the size of the market there that we're talking about, the World Bank estimates that about 15% of people have some form of a disability. In the US, the estimates are even higher, as high as 20%. And so in terms of the impact that can have for your organization in terms of market share, that's huge. And there is also some potential downside, because there are laws associated with this. So non-compliance can be very costly for organizations in terms of legal costs. If you could move to the next slide, please. Our research shows that a single lawsuit can cost an organization, even if they are just settling that lawsuit, can cost an organization as much as $400,000 just in terms of responding to the legal briefs and all that sort of stuff that goes on, and the impact that it puts on the organization to support the preparation of the materials that are involved in that lawsuit. And once the lawsuit is over, accessibility doesn't end. So this is a cost that needs to be added on top of the cost of actually dealing with accessibility. So our recommendation to organizations is to really get ahead of this curve, to embed accessibility right from the beginning, right from the design phase and the development phase, to address accessibility defects when they're cheap and inexpensive to address. As many of you will know, there's some very famous studies that have been done by IBM and others that show that the cost of addressing a defect once it's made it into production can be as much as 100 times as high as when it's addressed during the design phase. So the financial impacts and the return on investment for organizations who shift this testing as far left as they can are potentially huge.
So what about performance? So performance, for those who are not aware about it, the main purpose of testing performance is making sure that your application is responsive in an acceptable time, that you're not over-consuming resources, that your infrastructure that you've designed would handle the peak, the load, all the things like this. So when you use performance testing, first of all, you're not testing functional. So you're not here to fish for functional defects. So what was going to happen is you are assuming as a performance engineer that the application that you're testing is already functional. If you're not If not, but you're just going to generate a lot of exceptions, testing a non-stable application, and all the tests that you've invested and spent won't be very interesting because you will just consume time. When it comes to performance testing, there are several types of tests, of course. There is load testing, there's stress testing. You can do some web performance, more on the UI. There's tons of different way of validating from different standpoints. Of course, the thing that you're looking for in terms of KPI is, first of all, speed. So you want to figure out if your application responds. So depending if you're a very old web design application or if you're a single page apps, this notion of speed will be totally different. You want to figure out also if you scale. So if you're expecting to have huge spikes during the days, you want to make sure that your application can scale, especially if you have elastic architecture in the cloud. You want to make sure that those are working properly. Stable, you can also figure out that once you apply load, that all the user has good user experience depending on their network conditions, or if there are some events happening in the background of your architecture. So here I'm referring to, for example, combining load testing plus chaos monkey engineering, for example. And reliable, so measuring software, make sure that every time you test, you can repeat, you can define defects and test them on and be able to reproduce them, of course. So that was performance testing.
Thank you, Henrik. And I think that, just to chime in here, when you look at the different KPIs like speed, scalability, stability, reliability, some of them kind of touch one another. So you want to expand on the speed and scalability, you sometimes also impact the reliability and stability. So one definitely impacts the other. You want to make sure that you have all these KPIs in all of your performance test reports so you understand the full user experience upon load, and also in less peak times that we experience. With that, let's drill into the performance testing specifics of this webinar, starting with the change of methodology.
Yeah, so that's true that the way we're delivering software obviously have changed the last 12, 15 years. Most of those who started to do load testing and performance engineer, they were basically delivering in waterfall, so 6 different steps: requirement, design, implementation, testing, acceptance, and deployment. Performance testing was usually just before deployment, and you could have planned 2 weeks of work, but sometimes things were shifting, so implementation or development were taking longer than expected. Functional testing were taking longer than expected, and then instead of having 2 weeks, you'd only have a few days to deliver the same things. But at that time, performance were not very understood by most of the organizations. So you can discover major problems, but it was too late, because performance problems are usually very difficult to resolve. Because if it's related to the code or to the architecture, then if you discover it 1 week before deployment, then you don't have the time to react for sure. So moving to incremental was a bit better, but from a performance delivery or to people working in performance, it didn't change much. I think things have started to change from the moment we moved on to Agile. Shorter cycles, we cannot let the traditional performance testing happening like we did 12 years ago, because again, we are focused on the customer. If we discover a problem just before going live, then it means that you're spending your time maintaining and not bringing any innovation in your product. So we need to anticipate and control things. And now DevOps is even more true, shorter cycles. So we need to be smart and test on a daily basis. So that's how you do that. But I think the how you do that is pretty much related to also the way we've been designing our architecture. So we used to have those third-tier applications with a web presentation layer, with a business layer, and a database, or several databases. Most of the time, when you look at the business layer, we had those huge binaries that we were deploying on physical servers or virtual machines. But if we needed to add extra power, we were basically had to deploy the entire stack because we didn't have this model of just deploying what is needed to handle the load. So that was not very not a very anticipated approach, not very elastic architecture, and quite heavy as well. I think from the moment we start to rethink the way of designing architecture, we were more answering to two of the main challenges. First of all, we want to scale, being able to be to always deliver good performance to our customers. And also, we have one thing that we have in our mind: we want to test earlier. So with our microservice architecture, it's an ideal world. So just to remind, microservices, you can have small components, small services with their own database. So you can structure your teams in. You can structure teams that will be in charge of their own quality, of their own services, and then you start integrating those. The advantage of that is that when you have major loads or peaks, you don't have to redeploy the entire stack anymore. I can just add more power on the service A, for example, in the scheme here, just deploying more and more nodes and bring the elasticity. So we were basically, with this new approach of designing architecture, we are more aligned to moving to the cloud. And most of the people, when they're talking about the cloud, they look at they look at the marketing design that you can see, the messages that most of our cloud provider is exposing on the market, and say, hey, you should move to the cloud. It's going to be awesome because you're going to reduce costs of handling your infrastructure. You're going to be more availability to your services, better user experience. And you're going to simplify a lot of things within your organizations. Yeah, that seems pretty much true, but there is a big problem. If your application is consuming resources, is heavy, then you will spin up more and more nodes. So at the end of the day, what happens is that maybe you have delivered acceptable response times or user experience, but maybe the cost of the infrastructure has increased significantly. So you have to control that. Performance testing is everything about simulation. So if you test something, but not taking the time to understand how your user is interacting with your environment and your application, then you're going to run tests. You're going to make conclusion. You're going to make some changes on the code maybe, but at the end of the day, it doesn't represent real life. So you are spend hours resolving things that never happens. So the first thing you need to do when you work on performance is understand your application and your users, because you want to reflect the exact model that is that your user, the way your user is interacting with your application. So that's the first step. Once you have the right model and understand, the question is, how can I do that? How can I collect and build realistic test scenarios? Very simple. We have tons of solutions on the market. We have traditional monitoring, of course. We have tracking systems like Google Analytics and the others. And we have APM products. So there's tons of them. The advantage is that we are tracking the way users are interacting with their systems. So we can extract that, collect, analyze this, and we can build a workload model that will be realistic. And then the test that you will apply on the system will reflect real life, and you will be able to make the right conclusions. So the process, when you do early performance engineer, if we still put performance testing late on the cycle, like we used to do a few years ago, then again, we will discover problems where we won't have time to resolve it. So we want to shift left as much as possible by testing in dev environment. And we call that component level testing. So we're going to test our major components, our major API on daily basis. And we're going to include that in the pipeline. This, we want to test the same load. The idea is to detect regressions as fast as early as possible through a CI process. Once we have elected an application, a component to move on to staging, for example, to integration, then we still need to do performance testing. Why do I need it? Do I need to do that? Because I am connecting several services to each other, and I'm bringing potentially latency, network distance between the different services. So I can introduce performance problem as well. So testing from the integration standpoint is super important to validate that you are all, the idea again is to detect problems before it's too late. And then once we have a real applications assembled with a real UI, accessible from a browser or from a mobile device, then I will also test from those browser on devices to measure the user experience. So how do you do component testing? Simple. You take your app, your building, your fresh new Lego building, you break it, and you have components, you have bricks. So the idea is within all this list of bricks here, we're going to pick the one that are the most important for our app. I want to test the heart. I want to test the legs. I want to test the brain of my app, because obviously it's going to be used and every hour, every second. It's really important that those components are stable. Then, like I mentioned, we are going to automate. We don't have much time. We have very short cycles, and especially if you are in a continuous delivery, you want to have an automated pipeline to do everything. So people most of the time say, hey, I can run tests. It's easier on Jenkins or GitLab or others. But my main concern is, how do I analyze? This is a good point. Most of the time people say, I want to do my analysis manually because I trust there's no real process of automated analytics of performance testing results. But let's take a step back. How do I analyze my test results? There are a few things that we consider in our test results. The failures, the errors. I want to check that if I ramp up, the response time is stable. Look at the throughput, the hit per second, if they are aligned with my workload model. And then I'm going to look at the response times. If the response time has a spike, I'd like to understand what had caused this spike. So go look at the resources. And always need to look at the resources, because if I have good response times, but my infrastructure is in danger, it doesn't make sense to go in production. So with this approach here, we can try and start to think that we can automate that. And this could be done by introducing the concept of quality gates. So this is basically quite much aligned with the SRE methodology, where you have indicators and you have objectives. So indicators could be my response times of my add to cart transaction, for example. I like to look at my error rates. I like to look at maybe also the CPU, the network usage, and so on and so forth. So those are indicators. Then in front of those indicators, I will define objectives. I don't want to have my response times under, let's say, 1 second, more than 1 second. And I don't tolerate any degradations from the previous build more than 20%, for example. So by defining all those rules there, plus indicators, then I can let the process in my pipeline that will grab those specification files and then collect the metrics on the right data source. So any tools is a data source. So for example, a load testing product could be a data source. An APM product could be a data source. A monitoring solution could be a data source. So you pick all those counters, and then the quality gates based on your objectives will decide if you have reached or not the objectives, and will calculate a score based on all your rules. So basically, here I got a green light because my score that has been calculated by the quality gate is above 90%, for example. So if you bring that, the quality gate, then you are allowed to do fully automated process, including analysis.
Thank you for that, Henrik. Before we move to the accessibility, Tzvika, do you have a comment perhaps on the reporting, the analytics? I think Henrik mentioned about the failure reasons and stuff like that. How do you relate to that, not just for performance, but performance and other functional testing as well?
So thanks, Eran. So fast feedback is key across the board on different types of testing, not just functional and not just performance as a whole. And as we talk about a new reality where the pace of the release becomes an issue and the need to qualify builds in a fast and expedited mode, if you like, becomes really key for success. The ability to aggregate the data, as Henrik mentioned, and to be able to display it fast to hone in on the problem, identify the root cause issue for any potential developer for debugging purposes, is truly, key to the success here. It's really nice to see the ability really to work together with the Neotys team and with the technology and combine visibility from different angles through this great collaboration that we have here. The combo of the reporting that comes from the Neotys side and the Perfecto side, as you would see later on in the demo, is really unique, really allows the organization to get the desired fast feedback and move on, either qualify the build and proceed, or roll back quickly and identify, the root cause.
Awesome. Thank you, Tzvika. So now let's switch before the demo to the accessibility testing, and back to you, Dylan. And let's look at, the reality today regarding accessibility testing and development, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you, Eran. So yeah, very, very similar to what Henrik was talking about. The world has changed quite a lot, and therefore the way that we need to do accessibility testing today is different from the way it was when Section 508, for example, first came out many years ago. But a lot of organizations still consider accessibility testing something that gets done right at the end. In fact, if you go out and search on the internet for definitions of what is accessibility testing, a lot of the definitions you'll find out there are accessibility testing is usability testing. And as a result, what organizations end up doing is they treat their entire development process as agile, except for accessibility, which means that the accessibility defects end up piling up. What our COO likes to say is, if all you do with accessibility is the testing, then all you're going to get is defects. So what we recommend at Deque is that you really embed accessibility into all aspects of your agile process, starting with design. And in fact, as I talk a little bit further about the types of testing that you need to do, you'll see that design plays a really instrumental role in your testing, because it provides a lot of the meaning that you're going to be testing. Accessibility, a lot of accessibility is about the meaning. If an image has an alternative text to describe the image, one of the things you need to do is to make sure that that image matches that alternative text. And a lot of meaning comes from design. And so you're starting out by embedding accessibility right into your design, and then giving your development teams the tools that they need to be able to carry that design through the entire organization, through the entire development process, all the way through into production, so you can monitor in production. And what that really does is it drives down the cost of accessibility testing. As I said a little bit earlier, the cost of a defect when it's found during design, if that's a factor of 1, then if you find that same defect during development, it's about a factor of 6. If you find it during system or integration testing or UAT, it's somewhere between 12 to 15. And if you find it only in production, it's between 30 to 100 times the cost. And a lot of that is that cost is about the coordination, the communication, and the tracking of those defects. And if you work for an organization that is in an industry that's regulated, those costs rise dramatically as well, because all of these risks need to be managed as well. So for a lot of organizations, when they come to accessibility, they feel like Sisyphus, the mythical man who was doomed for all eternity to begin pushing a rock up the mountain at the beginning of the day, only to have the rock roll all the way down to the bottom when he got it to the top. And that's because a lot of organizations approach accessibility testing from a manual perspective as something that has to be done manually. And that's because they're approaching it in the wrong way. They don't have the right tools and they don't have the right approaches. So what are the right tools and the right approaches for accessibility testing? Well, the first thing is that there are a lot of what I call generic accessibility testing libraries out there for different platforms. Of course, we have our own called Axe, and it works very well on HTML, Android, and iOS applications. And what these generic accessibility testing libraries are like, they're like a pre-baked a set of acceptance tests for accessibility. And we've done many studies over the years of the number of defects that can be found through this generic accessibility testing. And consistently, we find that about 50% of the issues that we generally report back to organizations when we do an audit for them are issues that can be found with this sort of testing. So the first thing that we do with organizations when we're trying to drive the cost down is we get them to utilize this generic accessibility testing. And it can be used both in an interactive way and in a fully automated way. What I'm showing you here is a screenshot of the extension, the browser extension that we have that allows you to interactively test a web application. And when you do that and you end up with a clean application, you get this congratulation message which says, congratulations, you're done with the automated testing, the generic testing. Now you should move on to some of the manual testing. And your development team merge any code until it at least comes up acts clean with this fully automated generic testing. But that doesn't cover the things that a generic tool cannot cover. And what they cannot cover are the things that are more meaning related. When I talked a little bit earlier about the image matching the alt attribute, that's one aspect of meaning. Other aspects of meaning are, for example, in this mock-up that you see over here, this design comp, you can see that the image in this card has been designated as decorative. That means the image is not conveyed. You see that there are two different buttons. There's a button at the top that has a little pencil icon in it, and when the green text at the top is saying that the accessible name, or in other words, the text that will get spoken out when a screen reader encounters that button should be edit and then the name of the recipe, because this is a recipe card. So in this case, it would be edit chocolate cake. And this is the sort of design thinking that needs to go into your design process. Is your designers, when they're designing a user interface, they're thinking about the components of that user interface. They're thinking about, what does this button with a little pencil inside of it do? This is going to pop up the edit dialog box. What is this button at the bottom that says cook? What is that going to do? It's going to pop up the cook dialog box. And what is the information that's in the middle that talks about this particular recipe? That lays out various different attributes of the recipe with the values associated with those attributes. So the developers are doing the designers are doing a lot of this thinking, and all they need to do is put that down in some form of communication, whether that's written, whether it's verbal, whether it's scribbled on a whiteboard, however your agile team likes to do that sort of thing. They need to make sure that that is conveyed to the rest of the development team, because then it can be utilized by the developers to implement that correctly, and by whatever testing mechanism you have to test that. So you can write automated tests to ensure that the button attribute is what it should be. Let me show you what one of those tests looks like. Let me start that again. A little bit of silence here. So one of the tools that you can use to test that during development, that the developers themselves can use, is what we call the interactive intelligent guided testing. This capability embedded into the browser extension allows the developers to test for things like the buttons and the links, to make sure that the accessible names associated with those buttons and links are accurate, that the roles associated with those are accurate, that things like the heading structure of the page is accurate, that the forms and the form errors and validation of the forms is done correctly. And this is the set of tools that allows the development team to effectively take the design communication information from the designers and make sure that it makes its way through the development process. But they can also test those sorts of things in a fully automated fashion. So for example, let me show you how a little unit test can be written to test the edit button's alternative text. What you can see here is some code that is first getting hold of the button, then it's getting hold of the heading of that little card. It's calculating the accessible text using one of our library functions, and then it's comparing the two in an assertion to say, I expect that the button text is going to be the word edit, a space, and then the value of whatever the heading text is, because that's the name of the recipe. And this is, using this methodology, you can create automated regression tests for every aspect of accessibility that really drive down the cost of testing and eliminate most of your manual testing out of your development process.
This is great. This is great, Dylan and Henrik. Before I move to the pipeline discussion and the demo, just maybe a quick question for me to each and every one of you, Dylan and Henrik. When you're looking at, practicing and, including accessibility testing and performance testing, who in your mind, we are dealing with three different personas. We have the developers, we have the SDETs, the test automation engineers, and we have the business testers. Typically, who would be your go-to persona to own accessibility testing within a squad or a feature team, and who will be the one for the performance? Maybe starting with you, Henrik.
From a performance standpoint, yeah, there is two different personas that will be involved. And I think the developer itself, when they build their services, they build their components, they are the best one to build the right test case and measure the right indicators to that service. And then once you do the integrations or focus on the UI, then it's going to include more automations, other type of solutions. So here the SDET will be more, or the performance engineer will be the one that will be taking that part of the test, the performance test. So from integration to end-to-end testing, this will be the type of personas that will use performance.
Awesome. And Dylan, what's your take?
Yeah, well, Eran, this varies a little bit on what I call the maturity of the team and the organization. And it really depends on whether the organization is doing test-driven development, for example, versus having a separate group of people, SDETs as you call them, responsible for testing independently, or whether there's some kind of mixture of that. We definitely recommend that whoever is testing the functional testing, whether that's a developer writing tests before they write the code, or whether that's an SDET or some kind of test engineer writing code in parallel or writing tests after the fact, that you do your accessibility testing while you're doing your development and while you're doing your regular functional testing. So obviously, the tool that I talked about with intelligent guided testing is a tool that's designed to be used by developers while they're coding, so that they can, in fact, make sure that all the defects are eliminated even before they commit the code to the repository and before it ever gets merged in, because that's where you get the most return on investment if you're doing that. However, not all organizations are set up to do that, so we also make sure that our tools can be used by traditional QA engineers who are doing testing after the fact. So I suppose the answer is it depends, and it depends very much on the maturity of the team.
Awesome. I think it makes sense to me. Thank you for clarifying this point. It's a very important one, especially when we are moving to kind of building a pipeline as we segue towards the demo of this webinar. So Tzvika, if we take the Agile Testing Manifesto, we take the functional testing for accessibility and the performance testing together with the other types of testing, I think that this is a nice way of placing these different testing types in a pipeline on a daily basis. How do you define this slide or this pipeline?
Yeah, so what we see here is basically the daily routine that majority of DevOps teams would usually go through. And there are a couple of quality gates that would make sense to establish throughout this SDLC process. Upon pull request, we do see an important event of the integration test, the smoke or the acceptance as we know them. Those you usually run on a generic OS level for coverage purposes. We strongly recommend to combine at this phase both virtual devices and real devices from a platform perspective. But when we go down the path towards more of the regression test that happens, we do see some adoption by some organizations today also to run a midday integration or noon build, just to make sure that the productive hours of the day, the morning hours, are being evaluated before people leave the office or move to their afternoon activity, just as a kind of a generic checkpoint through the day. When those sessions happen, the value of performance is pretty clear, makes a difference when we identify bottlenecks and other issues that were mentioned here by my colleagues earlier, as well as the overall accessibility that should be part of the regression, that should be tested. We want to make sure that all the attributes that should be tested and the fact that the app should be fully complied with all the regulatory components of accessibility are there. So there is a very nice and prescriptive way, I would say, to embed the shift left non-functional activities as part of the standard and traditional functional flow as described in this slide.
Awesome, Tzvika, thank you. And I think that if we go back to the Agile Testing Manifesto and the few first slides that talked about the coverage, when you take and combine all of them in one testing and development strategy, I think you have a winning story. And with that, since we have Henrik and Dylan here, and they prepared a very great and comprehensive demo showing the integration of both performance testing from Neotys, AXE solution from Deque, running all as a pipeline against the Perfecto cloud. I will just switch to you, Henrik, to talk a bit about the demo environment, and we'll just launch the demo.
Sure. So we have a different tools that will be involved. So all the code and the test cases has been stored in GitHub. So Jenkins is going to collect that and run the pipeline that is built through Jenkins file to Groovy. But the environment is running in Amazon, and we have a small application called Conacart, which is an e-commerce website, which is containerized, so it's running on Docker. And we will utilize, of course, Neoload Web on a SaaS platform, Perfecto, Deque, so every test that will be delegated will be run on Perfecto. Deque will be part of it. And you will see there is lots of KPI that will come out of it. So let's have just a quick explanation on the pipeline that we have here. So the first step that Jenkins is going to orchestrate here in this pipeline is get the latest version of the code and the tests. And then we're going to build the app, deploy the app. We're going to build the test cases because everything is based on Selenium framework. So that will have as an output, we will run those tests on Perfecto, combining pure automation functional testing plus Deque. Then we will generate a Genie report in Jenkins. So you will have the test reports that will be accessible directly in Jenkins. We're going to then go on the performance side. Once we have the approval that everything is fine and stable, we can go for the performance. So we're going to deploy the load testing infrastructure that will be on containers. And then we're going to run the load test directly on with those infrastructure, utilizing Neoload on the protocol level, plus Selenium that will be executed through the Perfecto platform. All right, let's go for the demo.
Yeah, so let's just launch the demo right now, and I think it's running.
So here is the application that we're going to test during the entire demonstration. It's Conacart. It's an e-commerce website. All the tests will be triggered through Jenkins. So here we have already a prepared pipeline going for the various steps that we described. The first step, obviously, is to check out, take the code that is stored in GitHub, generate the test case, and trigger the test over Perfecto. And once we have the green light that the test case went well, we can go further and run a Neoload test. So let's run a test. And so now I'm triggering a pipeline. And let's have a look at how those test cases are represented within our project. So I'm going to jump into my IDE. We have IntelliJ here. This is the project itself with the Jenkins files and other things. Let's have a look at the Perfecto Appium class. This is the class that will be utilized for our test. As you can see, it's standard Selenium, and we decided to choose the Java language. You can see here we're using the standard Selenium remote WebDriver, and we have another driver here, the Neotys remote WebDriver. This one will be used here, but we'll never interact with our test until we reach to the load testing piece. We have a before section where we define our driver. what type of devices we want to interact. So here in our case, Galaxy. And then we are defining the remote driver to interact directly with the Perfecto platform. The test itself is here, and as you can see, there is a specific section where we define the Deque driver for all the accessibility testing. Okay, so now let's jump to the Perfecto dashboards. In the Perfecto dashboards, as you can see, we have the live stream. So here, as you can see, I can see lively my phone, the phone Galaxy, that is currently being utilized by Jenkins with the automation that is currently running on Perfecto. If I want to see the test results, I can jump to the CI dashboard, where I can see all the test runs that has been executed so far. So everything is green, everything is good, so far, so good. So let's have a see the heat map to see the various reports. So everything is good, so we can jump to the reports here. And if I click on this one here, I would be able to replay the replay of the last build, and I can look at the different sections. So I can look at, for example, the accessibility testing generated by Deque. If I expand here, you can see that Deque has detected some errors related to the accessibility. And those are part of the report. This could be either viewed directly from the Perfecto's UI, or I can also download a PDF report with the assertions reports here, and I can understand what are the different problems that has been detected by Deque and Perfecto. Now, Deque is generating a JUnit report in Jenkins. So we have here the assets that we have. So you can see all the various steps that has been detected, all the different components that has a failure, and it's describing everything. So if you want to report, Deque can generate it and store it in Jenkins as well. All right, so automation went fine, and now we are going to go to the load testing. So how is this load testing being represented in the Neoload project? So let's open the project itself. So here we have the Neoload project is currently used by Jenkins. As you can see, I already prepared this project. I have recorded the traffic from the browser or from a mobile device. I have various steps. So in my test case, I have two types of users: the browser that is just browsing the websites, and the buyer, the one that's going to be buying products and put in the cart. Aside of that, I have a Perfecto user. Why? Because I want to measure the user experience. So here is going to pick the Selenium test case and utilize the remote driver of Neoload to report back the timers in our product. We also have defined some SLAs, so we will have also an SLA report that will be generated in Jenkins as well. Okay, so now let's look at the Neoload dashboards. What type of metrics we are getting. So this is the Neoload web section. So here I can see all the various tests that has been executed so far. So we have different Konakar tests that have been executed. And if I want, I can already, similar to look at the trends. So I can see that all the different tests that has been executed in Konakar, see the response times, the transactions, the requests, the throughput. But if I want to jump more precisely, I can select the current test. So here we have built the test number 11 that is currently running, so I can have a look at it. And the beauty is I can also compare things lively. So here we have the test running. We have 11 users, 2 requests per second, and so on. I can look at the SLAs, but the SLAs will be exposed later on once we finish the test. But I'm going to jump directly on the dashboards. I'm going to create a new metric. Let's say I am looking for specific metrics. Are delivered by Neoload, so protocol level. So I'm looking at the response times from the home transaction here, and I put it on new graph. So this is the current run. So we have currently only a few minutes that has been currently running. But now, if I want, I could compare it with a live test running with my test number 9, for example. And I jump it here and here, which means here, now I'm comparing 2 tests together. Build number in brown, it's going to be the current test run, and in red, the test that we executed a few days ago. So you can compare things lively, or you can compare things that has been also they're already stored. The thing is, from the moment you combine Perfecto and Neoload is at the protocol level. So if you're worried about the user experience, then it makes sense to combine Perfecto, because here Perfecto is reporting metrics here, and I can see that we have some timers. So if I want to look here, I was looking at the home page, and I can also have this transaction navigate to the home page, and I can click on this timer here, and this timer is being reported by the UI itself. So by doing this, I will be able to compare two things, the protocol versus the UI. So if you're fishing for a user experience, you can combine Neoload and Perfecto. Neoload will make the load on the protocol level, and Perfecto will report back the user experience. If I go back to Jenkins now, the current build number 102 is running, but let's pick the build number 100. And you can see as well here, we have a JUnit report that has been shared by Neoload. And you can see here, if I click on this per run, I can see that we have a browser, the buyer, and if I click on the buyer, I can see that all my various SLAs that have been defined is successful, so far so good. So, Neoload, I would say what are the major advantage with Neoload is that we try to build test assets much faster and give you a report as fast as possible. So that will be the productivity will be the main advantage, and also the technology coverage. So traditional web app to package app with ACP, Citrix, and the others. What I just explained in the demonstration is we had Neoload Web Central. If you know load testing architecture, you usually have controllers and load generators. We still have it, but in the middle we have this main component that bring you dashboards, store your assets, and because there's an API, then you can stream out our data into any systems. It could be Grafana, could be Splunk, could be Tableau, and then you're free to do the analysis. In terms of design, we have two worlds, like we explained during the webinar, the end-to-end testing focused on the UI, and then you have the developers. We have two ways of building testing assets, from the UI to make it simpler and faster. And if the developer wants to test API, we have a YAML description language, we have a JUnit library. So we have both worlds, but at the end of the day, we have collaboration, because at the end of the day, you have a Neil project, you can reopen, you can change it. So you don't have two different worlds with two different tools. It's a one standard that would make life easier for collaboration and reuse things between teams.
Yeah, thank you, Henrik. And thanks for that great demo. That was really good. So at Deque, we're really trying to make organizations become independent in accessibility testing and really integrate it into the development process. And we provide a series of tools that are aimed at different types of use cases within the organization, all built on top of our open source Axe core library and built on top of our free browser extension, which is the capability that you have for doing single page tests and for getting help directly from the issues on how to fix those. The Axe DevTools product builds on top of that. It adds the intelligent guided testing function I talked about earlier. It adds some easy-to-use APIs and reporting capabilities for CI/CD integration, which Henrik showed you some of, some command line interfaces, as well as some tools that make accessibility testing for experts much more effective. On top of that, we have the Axe Auditor product, which is designed for organizations that have to do comprehensive tests of existing applications. And we have the Axe Monitor product, which allows organizations to monitor their application content, web content in production to ensure that content management systems and other processes do not introduce defects into systems that are already in production. Once again, embedding everything into the development process is key in order to drive down the costs of accessibility and in order to get that return on investment that you need. So Deque provides both services and products which help you do that, including training and tools. And I'm going to, because of time, I'm going to skip over this slide and give it back to Eran.
Thank you, Henrik and Dylan. Great content. Thanks for the demo and thanks for answering the question. We have a few more questions, and I know that we are short in time. Just a word about Perfecto. So Perfecto obviously integrates with both Neotys and Deque, allowing you to combine both functional and non-functional testing, embed them into your DevOps pipeline, shift them left with a full creation, execution, and lab in the cloud, as Henrik demonstrated, with a full dashboard heat maps, both from the CI as well as platform-specific dashboards to allow you to reduce the noise and move much more faster in your digital continuous testing journey. With the time that is left, and I know that we are really stretched, I would like to ask at least one or two questions each of you, because a lot of questions are coming in, starting with the first one, which is, why should my organization use an automated accessibility tool instead of outsourcing an accessibility audit every year or so? This is probably for you, Dylan.
Yeah, basically it comes down to what I talked about earlier, which is really a return on investment. If you're only detecting accessibility issues on a very irregular basis with an audit, then you're detecting them once things have got into production, and it's very expensive to fix those. And we find most organizations end up just not fixing them. And so really, if you really want to achieve accessibility, the only way to do that is to embed it into your process, and then the automation tools help to make that efficient and cost-effective.
Awesome, and probably tied to that question, beyond the cost of that solution that you just mentioned, how can I convince my boss that accessibility is good for the bottom line?
Well, that's pretty easy. There's 20% of people in the United States and around the world have some form of disability, and that's a huge market. So you're talking about the difference between people being able to come to your application, whether it's a website or whether it's a mobile application, and have a great experience of using it, or between them coming there and perhaps having a very bad experience and then going away and going to your competitors. So the market opportunity is huge. It's been estimated that in the United States alone, it's as big a market size as, for example, the size of the African American market. So that's big enough that I'm sure most organizations don't want to just completely miss out on that.
Definitely, definitely. Next question is, what kind of protocol is supported by NeoLoad? Is it only converting web technology? For you, Henrik.
No, so yeah, of course we support web technology because most of this application is utilizing web, but there is a lot of modern, we say, package applications that are still using heavy clients, such as SAP, for example, but also Citrix, for example. A lot of people are utilizing Citrix to make the delivery or VDI available for the applications. But we also cover all the stack related to IoT. So if you have any IoT applications we mentioned digital transformation in the beginning, IoT is a part of it. So MQTT, all the protocol that is used in the IoT space.
And is it possible to automate a NeoLoad test in other CI tools like GitLab, Amazon Code Pipeline, or others?
Of course. What we have here in the webinar, we picked Jenkins, but the automation that has been done in the Jenkins file, you utilize one of our command line that we have. So the command line is basically controlling our web dashboard that we saw in the demonstration. So you can start, you can stop, you can update the project, you can generate reports. There is tons of things. So if you have GitLab or anything that runs an automation, you could utilize that command line for sure.
Okay, so with that, I would like to finish this webinar, and wanted again to thank both Dylan, Tzvika, and Henrik for spending the time, the effort, creating the insightful content. And for those of you who we didn't get the chance to respond back to, we'll reach out to you independently and address the question. Thank you again, Dylan. Thank you again, Henrik and Tzvika.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.